So the first thing you do when you drop in the tenant billing object, which is the application, is double click on the license here. And you'll need to configure the number of suites that you've agreed to with your reseller. Once that is done, this product code will reflect the number of suites here. You can have multiple tenant billing instances in the same station, and that is what this second number is for. So if I drop in a second one, it will be instance number 2, and you can license some additional suites as well. If you ever need to reset them, you delete the unneeded tenant billing, and you can say reset instance, and it refigures out the lowest possible number that it could be. So you send this product code in, and you'll receive a license key like this, and it will require a station restart. So before we get too deep into things, I want to go over a few properties on the tenant billing object that you can't configure through the normal appliance. And I guess I should say that tenant billing was primarily designed as a standalone appliance. However, that does not prevent you from including any of the views here on the objects in the tenant billing application into your normal nav files. So these are some advanced features. In the application, the owner or property management level users can add new users themselves, and these are the permissions that would be assigned to those users. Likewise, tenants, tenant level users, when they get added, and they can get added through the appliance, would receive these permissions. So if you ever want to change the permissions that those new users get when they're created, you can do that by setting up the defaults here. Also, our meters themselves, they're meters with built-in rate schedules, and some with just rate links. And if all of your suites or tenants might, or many of them might share the same rate schedule, as a convenience, you can use the master rate schedule. Let me show you before I enable this what it looks like. See this bar up here? You only have home, owner, setup, suite manager. When I enable this, there'll be a new link up there for the rate schedule. All right. Now this rate schedule is a child of the tenant billing object, and it will have to manually be linked to the meters you wish to control with this rate schedule, but the convenience is there should you need it. Then also, if you want to primarily use the appliance as a standalone, but you need to include some additional graphics, you can have an external link, just a random link on that toolbar. We'll call it external link. This you can ORD to whatever, and you can provide your own icon for that as well. When we go back to this view, you can see the external link. This view here, by double clicking on the tenant billing object itself, is only accessible by property managers or owners. All right. Now, probably the first thing you'll do after dropping in the tenant billing object and licensing it will be adding suites. We decided to use suites rather than tenants so that the owner or property manager can change the occupants of a suite without calling the contractor, if that's how you want to present it to them, of course. But in the likelihood, you'll have fewer suite configuration changes than you will tenant changes. So it's organized by suites, and the only properties on here that are not editable through the appliance are the external links, and these are on a view that the tenants can see. All right. Then the next thing, which is the hardest part about this application, is choosing the meters you want to use. The easiest meter, the scheduled meter, is strictly tenant overrides. All right. You can link from this to control equipment, and you would probably want to link from the override schedule. All meters have a meter out, but this meter out is usually the result of multiple factors. On the scheduled meter, there has to be an override going, and there has to be a non-zero rate. So if you want to control directly from the override schedule, you can just link directly from that there. And maybe it's okay if you go from the meter out, because you're probably ORing. You'd probably want to OR this output with your normal, occupancy schedule or something like that. And the configuration of this is actually can be done in the appliance, so we don't need to go into any more details about that. Then there are two major classifications of meters after this one. They are a Boolean meter and a numeric meter, and they have an input of the type, all right, called meter in. And Booleans meters charge for time that the input is true, all right. But once again, the rate has to be non-zero. A numeric meter charges for the units consumed while the rate is non-zero. Okay, the meter has an additional parameters for configuring rollovers. It's pretty good at deducing that a rollover has occurred without configuring this, but in the process of it doing that, you may miss a couple units of consumption. Let's say the max value is 5,000, and the meter was at before that it was for the last reading. I can't remember exactly how it works. It was 49.99. It goes to zero. It ignores that zero, but then it starts incrementing up. 1, 2, and what it'll do, it is for that period it'll charge from zero, because it doesn't know what the top level was. And that's usually minuscule amounts, and you don't hit meter rollovers that often. But if it's a sensitive issue, you can plug them right into here. Now there's two more dimensions to add to a meter besides the type of the input and, let's say, the rate, and those are well, I actually kind of covered one already. Let's say a scheduled Boolean meter, all right, will charge when there is a tenant override, the input is true, and the rate is non-zero. Okay, and the same with the same idea happens with the scheduled numeric meter, and then a rated meter has a built-in rate schedule. So all of these other meters that we were talking about before getting to the rated meters, there is a rate, and at the owner level you can configure a fixed rate if you want. You can also link in the master rate schedule to these, or you can link in an arbitrary point if that's what you want to do. But when you get to the rated meters, there is a built-in schedule for control that the owner can control the rate with, and I'll show you the configuration of that through the normal appliance. Okay, so once this is set up, the owner can actually configure everything else. They probably won't. The contractor will. The first thing they're going to want to do is go into owner setup. This is where owner level users can be added. This contact information is used on the invoice, and if the owner wants to get a copy of the invoice email, they can put that here. Override notifications, just it's cut off there a little bit, but override notifications will send an email to the owner anytime a tenant has scheduled an override. Wacky request we got from a customer. And then the contractor can put in their email address when the application encounters very unusual errors. Let's say something happened to the history files that it creates, something very unusual. This has never been encountered, but it's kind of a trap for when we didn't know, hey, an error is possible here, but we don't see how it could happen. Then once the owner information is configured, you can configure the suites through this setup link here. So the first is the name of the suite. You can see Suite 104, and I can change it to anything. The tenant name, invoice recipients, are what they are. This shows up on the invoice, as do these 6 billing lines. And I'll tell you what, I will put in billing line 1 so we can see where that is on the invoice. Don't forget to hit save down here, although it'll remind you if you try to leave the view without saving. And these are the suite users. And it'll be very important to add users here if you're going to use a servlet so that they can log in and do the overrides themselves. Actually, it's not even the servlet. If they can log in and get the PX views as well. And actually, why don't we go ahead and add a tenant named tenant. This is all self-explanatory. The user manager, though, if this is true, Mr. Tenant has access to add additional tenant level users. So if they plan on having many users who can schedule overrides, and the property management company doesn't want to deal with all of that management, the tenant can do it here. And then the next page of setup is the actual meter configuration. You can give your meters names, and these show up on invoices. Whole quantities, if you only want to charge for increments of 1, 2, and not fractional, set that to true, and this is the unit symbol. Let's see, and if it has a built-in rate schedule, you can access the rate schedule here, or if there's a fixed rate that's or that rate input is not linked, they can edit a fixed rate here. There are additional charges on the invoice, tax, a minimum invoice quantity. There are 3 fees that aren't meter related that you can put in there. And if you have more than 3 fees, you can double them up. For example, you could put shipping and handling here, so it's really 2 fees for a dollar amount. And you can also get creative with the meters themselves. Just using a numeric meter, bumping it up by 1 through some logic, and naming it accordingly, so you can throw as many more fees as you want into the invoice through the actual meters. Then For generating invoice numbers, here's a prefix. You can put anything you want. It will increment whatever this number is. It just starts at 1,000 for random, for no specific reason. If you're emailing them, email subject and body, and the line items. So there's a PDF for the front page of the invoice, and then the line items, the details, can be attached as either a CSV or a PDF or neither if you want. And we'll put in invoice text 1, call that due upon receipt. That's the kinds of things you can put into there. And then you get to the final page of setup. The month's retention is how many copies of invoices you want to save, and the associate history as well. This is not a resource intensive application. However, if you're on a JACE 200, and we have customers who have 10, 15 suites on JACE 200s, you may only want to store 24 months of data. Pending invoice start. So basically, this date and this date represent the current invoice being worked on. When I click begin occupancy here in a moment, it is going to adjust these dates. Automatic invoicing is that, and an email, whether or not to, when you do automatic invoice, do you want to send an email? That's configurable here. And then the invoice day of the month. Now, if you make any changes here, Tritium's PX, it's a little weird, and sometimes this button doesn't highlight until I go over it, so I save that there. It's important to, let's say that day a month, to you change that to save before clicking the action. You won't get prompted to say you've made changes when you click this. And what this is going to do is adjust to today's date, set the next invoice to the proper date, and it will clear the history for the meters for this suite. Alright, so this is the next invoice. If you ever need to change something about a pending invoice, you can come right in here and manually edit these dates. So, let's say you were setting up and did some testing, and you need to skip a few days ahead. You can just come in here to skip over the days that you were testing the application. And that's how it's set up. Alright, so everything is configured. These links are convenience links. What I'm going to do is do a quick override of 1 hour, get some data going on this. And future events you would be able to see. So this one is actually ongoing right now, but you can cancel the tenant can cancel the events as well through there. So the biggie are the invoices. So it can be automatically created, or you can manually create an invoice. And so I just did that. I don't think that we've oh. Does anyone know I don't have a charge on the meter that I didn't override? No rate. Yeah. Alright, we finally have an amount, 17 cents. So the invoice has been created. It may have been mailed off, but the biggest thing is you need to make adjustments for whatever reason. So the editable properties are available on the invoice when you double click it. Niagara histories are pretty stringent, and we can't actually edit the records created by the appliance because they're not normal trend records. So if you make an adjustment, or you need to make an adjustment, you can do the date, right? But you could also put in a quantity or a negative quantity in the invoice itself. And here we'll put in a comment so we can see where that is as well. All right. And then once that's in there, you need to recalculate, and the invoice gets updated. A lot of our customers do not directly send the invoices to the tenant. The majority send the owner gets the invoice sent to them first, right? And then they might want to make a change, or what have you. I don't know how often adjustments are performed. Usually the adjustments come up in the setup period when the owner is questioning the contractor on the use of the appliance, and that's usually where this comes up, and maybe they just don't trust it is why the emails get sent to the owner, but usually that's what occurs. But yeah, that's what the adjustment is for, is if there's a billing dispute and a correction has to be made. Anyway, you can see how you can adjust an invoice, and you can manually email them. Let's say the owner is now happy, they could come in here and press email, or if they got an email, they could forward it however they want to handle it. We can take a look at the invoice. So this is not the PDF, all right, but you can see the where the different pieces of text, billing line one we put in, due upon receipt, and then the comments. So in the comments, adjustment, explain what the adjustment was for. And if you export it, I believe right now it's only going to export this front page. So this is what the invoice looks like. It used to be a nice full page. We've had so much difficulty with this center section. We had a customer with 30 some odd meters, and we switched to Tritium's report pane, which works out very nicely, but we can't make it go full page. But this can grow very large, and you can go way beyond 30, and this starts to shrink as well, which is really nice. But this is what an invoice looks like. The front page of the invoice. The details get attached separately. If you want to manually export the line items, just use Tritium's export function on that table there. All right. Then the tenant servlet can be dropped anywhere in the station. It doesn't matter. And only tenants can log into it. And they log in it. Oh, well, let me log into it by the servlet name. So if they actually, you know what? I take that. Yeah, I think they do have to type in tenant. And let's see. I was, and I don't think I had a pass. So it is what it is. It works on smartphones. It's very lightweight. It has one additional feature that you can't get through the PX, and that being if the user, or let's say the property, is in a different time zone than the server. If they schedule it here and the user sets their time zone accordingly, then everything is handled properly. Otherwise, going through the PX interface, if the building is in a different time zone, when you're scheduling overrides and rates and everything, you have to offset it for the local time zone. It's hard for me to verbalize, but I think you get the idea. Basically, if you have time zone issues, at least the tenants can come in and schedule their overrides for their local time zone. And these are the meters that had had tenant overrides. You can choose what you want, when, the time, done, and then you can see the schedule, and they can also delete events as well. And for example, this is the active one, and that could just be canceled. And the users can also edit their profile. And that's really it. Um, there isn't much more to the appliance. We tried to build in, as much documentation as possible into the UI. Of course, and I'm going to say I'm guilty of this, especially on this last page. Forget to see things like save any changes above before pressing this button. So I was giving a demo and I had set the date, but I hadn't saved it, and I began occupancy and nothing was working. So, none of us can seem to read documentation, but it is what it is. But it is otherwise pretty simple. The one thing that we can't do, however, I think it can be done with station objects, is proportional billing. So in a proportional billing scenario, the owner gets a utility invoice and they want to distribute it among their tenants. And so what they'd really like to do is measure the consumption of each tenant, figure out the percentage of the overall consumption, and divvy up the bill accordingly. And we don't really have an elegant solution for that. I was thinking about it a little bit this morning before coming in. I was thinking, you can probably set up bogus suites that measure the consumption you care about, have an input point where they can put in the utility amount, so you can calculate, what percentage each suite is, and then run that into a numeric meter, or add it to a numeric meter so that you could get the delta, something like that. It might be possible. We've had customers, for example, they needed to bill at one rate for the first hour of the charge, and then a lower rate for subsequent hours. And because the power of Niagara, and our meter inputs, you can link any Tritium objects into them. You can get very creative with your rates and so forth. It just takes someone who's pretty proficient in Niagara itself.